We start with early years. Helena Petrovna Hahn's start in life was very dramatic. She was born during a thunderstorm, and at her christening the following day, an unfortunate accident occurred when the priest's robes were set alight and he and others were badly burned. These incidents, plus the fact that the birth date in the old calendar was the 30th/31st of July, which was a date that meant something sinister to the local folklore, were enough for the superstitious Ukrainian servants to declare that the baby Helena would have a difficult and tumultuous life. Helena was unlike any other child, for by the age of 4, she was aware of her psychic powers. She had many invisible companions, and the family observed her conversations, which at times made her laugh and at other times terrified her. The family referred to them as Helena's spooks, and we would today call them elementals. Her sister Vera described the sort of phenomena that accompanied Helena as raps and whisperings, knocks and movements of furniture, and other things. It seemed as though she was surrounded by invisible beings for whom she provided a ready source of psychic power. To some extent, she could control these manifestations by her will, but mostly they were beyond her control. She found them a great nuisance at times and often very embarrassing, and she knew she must gain complete power over them or have them exorcised, or if not, she would then go mad. It was some time before she learned to control these entities and was able to order them to do her bidding. It is this ability that enabled her to perform the many illusions that she became famous for in later years. Her other ability as a child was psychometric clairvoyance. Psychometry is the ability to receive from any object, whether held in the hand or placed against the forehead, the impressions with which that object had previously been in contact. HBB wrote in Isis Unveiled, "When the psychometer examines his specimen, he is brought into contact with the current of the astral light connected with that specimen, and which retains pictures of the events associated with its histories. These pass before his vision with the swiftness of light." By just holding an object, Helena was able to know its history. Her sister Vera tells us, "She used to dream aloud and tell of her visions, evidently clear, vivid, and as palpable as life to her. How lovely the description she gave us of the submarine life of these beings. How vividly she described their past fights and battles, assuring us that she saw it all. Sometimes she would tell her stories lying on the ground in the open. Then she would draw in the sand with her finger the fantastic forms of long dead monsters gleaned from the bone fragments lying around her. Her description of these creatures was so clear that her listeners would be transported to a savage, prehistoric world. Helena's grandfather had a library full of books on alchemy, magic, and other occult sciences, which were her preferred reading as opposed to her school books. And later in life, she said this, "I had read them with the keenest interest by the age of 15. Another example of HBB's psychometric powers comes from much later in her life, when in New York in 1874. After Colonel Olcott's articles on the Eddy brothers phenomena were published in a newspaper, he was approached by Mr. William Judge, asking to be introduced to a medium. Olcott took him to see his friend, and Judge was amazed at how much HBB knew about him, his family, and even his idiosyncrasies, although they were complete strangers. Determined to put HBB to a test, he took an ancient scarabaeus that she had never seen, had it wrapped, and posted anonymously to her without him touching the parcel. When he visited her a few days later, she thanked him for the gift. He pretended ignorance, but she said it was useless and proceeded to tell him how it was sent and by whom. Psychic powers. As already intimated, HPB displayed amazing psychic powers. What do we mean by this? These powers are also known by the Sanskrit word siddhi. The word siddhi comes from the verbal root sid, meaning to attain. That which is attained is beyond the perception of the five senses. These powers are the ability to see clairvoyantly, to hear clairaudiently, the ability to be in a rapport with others having similar abilities, and to have the powers of receptivity and perceptibility. HPB had all these remarkable accomplishments, which, thanks to the training received from her masters, became more refined and controlled over time. These phenomena require knowledge of the astral light. HPB describes the astral light in The Secret Doctrine. To us, the invisible tablets of the astral light, the great picture gallery of eternity, a faithful record of every act and even thought of man, of all that was, is, or ever will be in the phenomenal universe. As said in Isis, this divine and unseen canvas is the book of life. Astral bells. Another of HPB's abilities was to produce the sound of bells ringing, which was a modification of the knocks and raps she could so easily create. In his book, The Occult World, Mr. Sinnett quotes a letter written by Alice Gordon in 1890. She said, "You have doubtless read of the so-called astral bells. These I have often heard in Madame Blavatsky's presence, both indoors and out of doors, and can be produced in the air without the intermediation of any solid object whatever. The sound of a silvery bell, sometimes a chime or little run of 3 or 4 bells on different notes. I heard them on scores of occasions and in all sorts of different places. The nearest approach to the sound is that produced by striking softly a thin wine glass, which produces a clear musical sound. Besides being for the amusement of spectators, the bell sounds had a more practical purpose. They were often used as a form of communication between HPB and her masters. An example of this is related by a Mr. P.C. Roy, in whose house HPB was staying. On the day following Madame's arrival, as we were sitting at luncheon, we heard in the air a soft tinkling sound as that of a bell. No sooner she heard the sound than she rose up hurriedly from her chair, saying, I am called, and in a most agitated manner proceeded towards her room. As she was going out of the dining room, another sound like the first was heard immediately over her head. She then shut herself in a room for some time. There is much recorded about the phenomena HPB was able to produce. She was often approached by complete strangers who had heard of the marvelous things that happened in her presence and requested a demonstration. Most times, HPB willingly obliged. One of the most astonishing events is recounted by A.P. Sinnett. The date is October the 3rd, 1880. And Colonel Olcott and Madame Blavatsky were staying with the Sinnetts at their house in Simla. That morning, a picnic breakfast had been arranged, to which Mr. and Mrs. Hume had also been invited, making 6 in all. At the very last minute, they were joined by Major Henderson. Sinnett sets the scene. After going down the hill for some hours, a place was chosen in the wood by the upper waterfall for our breakfast. Whilst the servants were unpacking the baskets and preparing the refreshments, someone joked that they were a cup and saucer too few and laughingly asked HPB to create another cup and saucer. Madame Blavatsky said it would be very difficult, but she would try. And after mental conversation with one of the brothers, she wandered about, marked a spot on the ground, and asked one of the gentlemen to bring a knife and dig. After clearing the scrubby undergrowth and digging among the tree roots, a perfect replica dark cup was discovered. More digging revealed a matching saucer. Sinnett tells us both objects were in among the roots which spread everywhere through the ground, so that it seemed as if the roots were growing round them. This is an absolutely amazing achievement, for it would have been impossible for it to be premeditated or faked. The wonderful spectacles HPB was able to produce attracted many people onto the society. One wonders how many actually joined the society for that reason alone, and how many were interested in the ancient wisdom the society taught. And just as an aside, this Major Henderson, who joined the picnic party, was so in awe of what Madame Blavatsky had managed to do that he wanted to join the society immediately. However, within a week, he'd resigned. We don't know why. Now, moving on to methods of writing. I'm sure the masters engaged HPB for more serious reasons than the phenomena she was able to produce. She spent years being trained to communicate with her masters through clairaudience and clairvoyance, so she could act as a transmitter of the message the Mahatmas wished to communicate to the Western world. How did she do this? Well, according to G.A. Barborka in his book, H.P. Blavatsky, Tibet and Tulku, there were several processes involved in her writings, which include writing by means of instruction, writing by dictation, writing by directive clairvoyance, writing by psychometry, and writing by means of precipitation. Writing by instructions. This is particularly applicable to the preparation of the secret doctrine. During its writing, HPP was for the most part alone in Wurzburg, Germany, and later in Ostend, Belgium, and then in London when the work was completed. She had little or possibly no access to libraries and research facilities. So how could she write so knowledgeably on esoteric topics? It seems that she was under the oral instruction of her masters, which HPB jokingly referred to at times as coming by spiritual telepathy, but more often by means of written slips. Countess Watchmaster, who lived with HPB for almost a year, says in her reminiscences of H.P. Blavatsky, "Day after day she would sit there, writing through all the long hours. I suppose at that time she lived much in the inner world, and there saw sights and visions which compensated for the dreariness of her daily life." With regard to the written slips of paper, it seems that pieces of paper bearing either red or blue writing would appear on Madame Blavatsky's writing table. Generally, these would be present first thing in the morning, although it was known that the table had been cleared and tidied at the end of the previous day's work. "These are my writing assignments placed there by my teachers," she explained. The Countess continues with another example of how HPB was instructed. "Often in the early morning, I would see on the writing table a piece of paper with unfamiliar characters traced upon it in red ink. On asking her what the meaning of these mysterious notes was, she replied that they indicated her work for the day. These are examples of precipitated messages. HPB followed the instructions meticulously, even rewriting a page a dozen times before it was deemed satisfactory." Moving on to writing by dictation. This comes under three categories: writing by clairaudient dictation, by receptive dictation, and by perceptive dictation. For clairaudient dictation to be effective, it would be necessary for a person receiving the message to be en rapport with the person transmitting it. Rather like tuning a radio into the right wavelength. HPB had the ability of making herself responsive so that she could hear the message and write down what was being dictated to her. Writing by receptive dictation is similar to the above, but relies on the transmitter, that is, a Mahatma in HPB's case, to be able to impress his thought directly upon the receiver's attuned mind, so that the message can then be written down. In this case, no sound is heard clairaudiently. Perceptive dictation also requires synchronization between sender and receiver. In this process, however, instead of the need for a transmission of the message, the receiver has the ability to perceive this message and take down the result of the perception. An example of these three abilities is contained in a letter written to A.P. Synod, which is dated January the 6th, 1886. This is what she wrote. "I am at 47th Street, New York, writing Isis, and his voice dictating to me. In that dream of retrospective vision, I once more rewrote all of Isis and could now point out all the pages and sentences Master Mahatma K.H. dictated, as those Master M did. I again saw myself night after night in bed, writing Isis in my dreams at New York, positively writing it in my sleep, and felt sentences by Mahatma K.H. impressing themselves on my memory." In concluding this section, I will quote HPB's words just 11 days before her passing. "Every word of information found in this work, Isis Unveiled, or in my later writings, comes from the teachings of our Eastern Masters. and that many a passage in these works has been written by me under their dictation. In saying this, no supernatural claim is urged, for no miracle is performed by such a dictation. Space and distance do not exist for thought, and if two persons are in perfect mutual psychomagnetic rapport, and of these two, one is a great adept in occult sciences, then thought transference and dictation of whole pages becomes as easy and as comprehensible at the distance of 10,000 miles as the transference of two words across a room. Writing by directive clairvoyance. Directive clairvoyance is the ability to select a book on a specific theme, and then, although never having seen the volume before, choose a selective appropriate passage on a predetermined subject from any page in the work. Then, having selected a citation, the ability to copy it verbatim and give the correct page. If it was necessary to support the citation by a quotation from another book, the same process would take place. In either case, it was unnecessary to see the book itself, nor handle it, nor search through its pages. It would be a matter of solely visualizing the page from which the desired extract was to be copied. Now, all this is done without moving from a chair and without turning a single page or referring to the index. And what we do have to understand about all this is that some of the works that Blavatsky looked at are not found in libraries in the Western world at all. It is because of her training by her masters that HBB could accomplish such a feat. She described the process to the Countess like this. Well, you see, what I do is this. I make what I can only describe as a sort of vacuum in the air before me, and fix my sight and will upon it. And soon scene after scene passes before me like the successive pictures of a diorama. Or, if I need a reference or information from some book, I fix my mind intently, and the astral counterpart of the book appears, and from it I take what I need. The more perfectly my mind is freed from distractions and mortifications, the more energy and intentness it possesses, and the more easily I can do this. Colonel Olcott assisted HBB with the writing of Isis Unveiled in New York, and wrote about it in his old diary leaves. And he said this: to watch her at work was a rare and never to be forgotten experience. We sat at opposite sides of a big table, usually, and I could see her every movement. Her pen would be flying over the page. Then she would suddenly stop, look out into space with the vacant eye of a clairvoyant seer, shorten her vision as though to look at something held invisible in the air before her, and begin copying on her paper what she saw. The quotation finished, her eyes would resume their natural expression, and she would go on writing until again stopped by a similar interruption. Colonel Olcott proofread her writings and cites a time when he queried the accuracy of some writing and wanted to see the original for himself. HBB reluctantly agreed and materialized the 2 volumes in question. He was able to prove to her that he had been correct in questioning what she had written. Now, writing by psychometry. As I have already mentioned, HPB's childhood ability to see ancient times by just holding a fossil or stone. HPB explains in ISIS how this is done. By applying a fragment of a substance to his forehead, the psychometer brings his inner self into relations with the inner soul of the object he handles. When he examines his specimen, he is brought into contact with the current of the astral light connected with that specimen, and which retains pictures of the events associated with its history. Psychometry does not require reading a text, but seeing pictures as if on a screen. HPB wrote to A.P. Sinnett about the difficulties she sometimes experienced. Master finds that it is too difficult for me to be looking consciously into the astral light for my SD. And so it is now about a fortnight. I am made to see all I have to as in my dreams. I see large and long rolls of paper on which things are written, and I recollect them. Writing by precipitation. This generally refers to the materialization of a message on paper or some other substance. This is a very complex process, and it would take another talk to explain how it happens. So I will just give you an example of HPB's ability to make a writing. But in this case, it is actually a portrait which appears on paper without the use of any writing equipment, as related by Colonel Olcott in old diary leaves. At the close of dinner, we had drifted into talk about precipitation, and Judge asked HPB if she would not make somebody's portrait for us. She asked whose portrait he wished made, and he chose that of a particular yogi whom he knew was held in great respect by the masters. She crossed to my table, took a sheet of my crested club paper, tore it in halves, kept the half which had no imprint, and laid it down on her own blotting paper. She then scraped perhaps a grain of a plumbago of a Faber-lead pencil on it, and then rubbed the surface for a minute or so with a circular motion of the palm of her right hand. After which she handed us the result. On the paper had come the desired portrait, the yogi depicted in samadhi. The portrait is in a medium not easy to distinguish, and if you hold the paper horizontally towards the light, you might fancy the pigment was below the surface, combined with the fibers. So how is this achieved? Writing by precipitation is through an electromagnetic connection existing on the psychological plane between a Mahatma and one of his chelas. The receiver hears the sound of an astral bell and prepares to receive a message. HBB explains it like this. The thoughts arising in the mind of the Mahatma are then clothed in word, pronounced mentally and forced along the astral currents to the pupil to impinge on the brain of the latter. Thence they are borne by the nerve currents to the palms of his hand and tips of his fingers, which rests on a piece of magnetically prepared paper. As the thought waves are thus impressed on the tissue, materials are drawn to it from the ocean of Akasha by an occult practice, and permanent marks are left. As by now you will have realized, HPB has some remarkable psychic powers. none more so than that of allowing herself to be taken over by another entity for the purpose of composing the documents of ancient wisdom. This is done in 3 stages. Now, the first is to withdraw a specific portion of the inner self so that it may stand aside as an onlooker. When this occurs, the physical vehicle is seen as a casket, and a feeling of lightness is sensed in the freed portion. The second stage is the ability to project the freed portion of that inner self to any desired location. And the third stage is to enter another prepared vehicle. After this, the transferred portion takes over the new body for the desired purpose. And we read in the Sloka 39 of the Sutras of Patanjali this: the inner self of the ascetic may be transferred to any other body, and there have complete control, because he has ceased to be mentally attached to the objects of sense, and through his acquisition of the knowledge of the manner in and means by which the mind and body are connected. HPB had this facility and describes it in a letter to her sister Vera. Several times a day, I feel that beside me there is someone else, quite separable from me, present in my body. I never lose the consciousness of my own personality. Someone comes and envelops me as a misty cloud, and all at once pushes me out of myself, and then I am not I anymore, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, but someone else. Someone strong and powerful, born in a totally different region of the world. And as to myself, it is almost as if I were asleep or lying by, not quite conscious. Not in my own body, but close by, held only by a thread which ties me to it. However, at times I see and hear everything quite clearly. I am perfectly conscious of what my body is saying and doing, or at least its new possessor. I even understand and remember it all so well that afterwards I can repeat it and even write down his words. At such a time I see awe and fear in the faces of Olcott and others, and follow with interest the way in which he half pityingly regards them out of my own eyes and teaches them with my physical tongue, yet not with my mind, but with his own, which enwraps my brain like a cloud. As already said, Colonel Olcott was HPB's constant companion throughout the writing of Isis Unveiled, and could detect which particular somebody was working through her. Not only because of the different styles of handwriting, but also the changes that took place in her appearance. And he describes one occasion like this. She and I were in our literary workroom in New York one summer day after dinner. It was early twilight and the gas had not been lighted. I heard her say, "Look and learn," and glancing that way, saw a mist rising from her head and shoulders. Presently, it defined itself into the likeness of one of the Mahatmas, the one who later gave me the historical turban, but the astral double of which he now wore on his mist-born head. Absorbed in watching the phenomena, I stood silent and motionless. The shadowy shape only formed for itself the upper half of the torso and then faded away and was gone. Whether reabsorbed into HPB's body or not, I do not know. She sat statue-like for 2 or 3 minutes, after which she sighed, came to herself and asked if I had seen anything. When I asked her to explain the phenomena, she refused, saying that it was for me to develop my intuition, so to understand the phenomena of the world I lived in. And now we're going to talk a little bit about HPB's personality and character. HPB was well known for her fiery, irascible character, but she also had her softer side. She would produce phenomena on request without complaining. She had a kind heart, but she was also a little naive and trusting. Parbati Churn Roy, he was the person who Blavatsky was staying with when she heard these astral bells calling her. He wrote about a visit he received from HPB in 1882 and his anxieties on how to entertain her. My anxieties were, however, put to rest as soon as I met her. There could not be a more simple, unostentatious, open-hearted, and unceremonious person than HPB. Her heart was full of love and kindness for others. Elizabeth G. K. Holt lived with HPB for a time in New York and wrote of her like this. Madame Blavatsky was certainly an unusual figure. I think she must have been taller than she looked. She was so broad. She had a broad face and broad shoulders. Her hair was a lightish brown and crinkled. Her whole appearance conveyed the idea of power. In her personal memoirs of H.P. Blavatsky, Mary K. Neff wrote, I never looked upon Madame as an ethical teacher. For one thing, she was too excitable. When things went wrong with her, she could express her opinion about them with a vigor which was very disturbing. I would say here, I never saw her angry with any person or thing at close range. In mental or physical dilemma, you would instinctively appeal to her, for you felt her fearlessness, her unconventionality, her great wisdom and wide experience, and her goodwill, her sympathy with the underdog. Princess Helene von Rakowitz wrote about her like this. She possessed an irresistible charm in conversation that comprised chiefly an intense comprehension of everything noble and great. Her really overflowing enthusiasm, joined to the most original and often coarse humour, was a mode of expression which was the comical despair of prudish Anglo-Saxons. Annie Besant describes Blavatsky in her book, H.P. Blavatsky and the Masters of Wisdom, like this. She was of heroic stature with a titanic nature, unconventional, careless of appearance, frank to unwisdom, as the world estimates wisdom, too honest to calculate against the dishonesty of others. She laid herself open to continual criticism and misunderstanding. Full of intellectual strength and with extraordinary knowledge, She was humble as a little child. Brave to recklessness, she was pitiful and tender. Passionately indignant when accused of sins she loathed, she was generous and forgiving to a repentant foe. She had 100 splendid virtues and a few petty failings. I will let Master Kuthumi have the last word. In a letter which was nominated or called K.H.'s confidential memo about Old Lady to Mr. Sinnett, received in the autumn of 1881, he says this: I am painfully aware of the fact that the habitual incoherence of her statements, especially when excited, and her strange ways make her, in your opinion, a very undesirable transmitter of our messages. Nevertheless, once that you have learned the truth, that this unbalanced mind, the seeming incongruity of her speeches and ideas, her nervous excitement, once that you know that nothing of it is due to any fault of hers, you may perchance be led to regard her in quite a different light. This state of hers is intimately connected with her occult training in Tibet, and due to her being sent out alone into the world to gradually prepare the way for others. Her outer personality is continually referred to by both K.H. and M in such terms as the following: an enfeebled female body in which we might say a vital cyclone is raging much of the time. The poor, worn-out mortality we know as the old lady. Oh, the poor, trusting, credulous nature. Take away from her her clairvoyant powers, and what remains? A hapless, broken-hearted woman. She does rave betimes, but she is truthful and does the best she can for you. In other words, that's for Sinnett. Another letter dated October 1882, K.H. says, all that now happens is brought on by H.B.B. herself, and to you, my friend and brother, I will reveal her shortcomings. Know then that if she ever became guilty of real deliberate deception, owing to that seal, it was when the presence of phenomena produced, she kept constantly denying, except in the matter of such trifles as spells and raps, that she had anything to do with our production personally. From your European standpoint, though, an imprudent, blamable zeal. If we look into the motive, a sublime, self-denying, noble, meritorious, not dishonest zeal. He continues, she can and did produce phenomena owing to her natural powers, combined with several long years of regular training, and her phenomena are sometimes better, more wonderful and far more perfect than those of some high-initiated trailers whom she surpasses in artistic taste and purely Western appreciation of art. Of course, she is utterly unfit to be a true adept. Her nature is too passionately affectionate. In your opinion, HVB is at best, a quaint, strange woman, a psychological riddle, impulsive and kind-hearted, yet not free from the vice of untruth. We, on the other hand, under the garb of eccentricity and folly, we find a profounder wisdom in her inner cell than you will ever find yourselves able to perceive. So, as I hope you will have realized by now, that Madame Blavatsky was a really remarkable woman in many ways. And I have discovered this in the research in this talk. She devoted her life to the masters and put all her efforts into obeying their orders, without thought of the personal cost, in order to bring the Theosophical teachings to a Western world in desperate need of occult knowledge. And here are the books that I referred to in producing this talk. Thank you.